There's definitely a lot to say about Counter-Strike's success. From the classic 1.6 to the beloved Source and onto the current global offensive, CS has solidified its place in the upper rungs of the FPS ladder for over 20 years now. But of course there has to be a catch somewhere along the line. A bug, an update, or even a full release that almost sits as a mark on the franchise's legacy. For Call of Duty it was Infinite Warfare, for Battlefield it was 2042, but what about our beloved Counter-Strike? Today, let's take a brief look back at the strange development history and the lesser known and least popular Counter-Strike, Condition Zero, and what caused it to fail in the end. With the smash hit success of the original Counter-Strike, there was certainly a push for the developers to not only continue support, but also be responsive to the community's wishes, and so they were. Counter-Strike would grow even more in popularity after Valve's acquisition of the title, but Valve's leader, Gabe Newell, wanted something a bit different for the competitively centered Counter-Strike, something that would more closely resemble the story-driven narrative that the original Half-Life was so well known for. In and around early 2001, Valve would be contacted by a certain development company, expressing their need for a project and interest in Valve's IPs. Newell saw this as an opportunity for his single-player-esque Counter-Strike idea to come to life, and so developmental discussions began. A considerably well-known company in the late 1990s, Rogue Entertainment was mainly known for their work on some content in the Quake franchise, which is likely why Valve moved so quickly on them offering their services. With Valve and Rogue Entertainment reaching an agreement in April of 2001, the company was determined to meet the E3 2001 deadline for reveal, which would only be around 1 or 2 months in the future. The earliest developed versions very closely resembled that of Half-Life's single-player design, but of course in the Counter-Strike universe. From early screenshots and information, it seemed to closely resemble the original Counter-Strike 2, as Rogue was most likely reusing assets either as temporary placeholders to meet the deadline or to speed up development altogether. Rogue's version of Counter-Strike would also feature some interesting weapons such as a crossbow, landmines, and a suicide belt? Either way, everything was seemingly going swell, until it wasn't. Its producer, Jim Molinetz, decided to leave Rogue Entertainment for a senior position at SCE San Diego. This, however, didn't worry the team as development was quite far along, but for Valve it was a different story. Feeling concerned for the game's quality and Rogue's financial stability, Valve removed the project from Rogue Entertainment in May of 2001. In a 2001 email written by Bob Pavlock, one of the developers from Rogue at the time, he states that Valve expressed a feeling of betrayal and would accuse Rogue of knowing about the producer's departure in advance without disclosing the information to them. Whether this is true or not is uncertain, but I have my doubts to say the least. That being said, after the development was taken out of Rogue's hands, the company would dissolve completely. For a brief period in May of 2001, following the Rogue debacle, Valve tasked a small team headed by Eric Johnson with the development of the new Counter-Strike title. It was in this time period that Valve would officially announce the game via CGW magazine as Counter-Strike Condition Zero, with more details set to be released in fall of the same year. It was at this time in summer of 2001 that Valve would hand development over to Gearbox Software so they could focus more heavily on another project. Gearbox was well known to Valve at this point, having just finished their work on the Blue Shift expansion following the already critically acclaimed Opposing Force expansion of 1999. Coupled with their knowledge of the Gold Source engine, this would be the perfect team to get Condition Zero's development back on track. Gearbox would scrap what Rogue had created and start over, focusing heavily on technical improvements to the Gold Source engine, with new additions including alpha blending, an LOD system, and the use of weather effects. Of course, this all seems pretty trivial by today's standards, but you have to remember, this was 2001. Intensive games at the time recommended a whopping 32 megabytes of VRAM. Development was going well, with Gearbox showing off the graphical improvements, new weapons, models, and textures, as well as level design from some of the more popular figures of the CS community. Just take a look at the quality here. Yeah, nothing says 2001 webpage archive like sub 144p images. Either way, Gearbox continued to speak highly of their new Counter-Strike title, claiming their inspiration for its single-player mode would come from games like Tony Hawk and Gran Turismo. A less linear approach would allow the player to roam freely and accomplish goals in whatever order they saw fit. On top of this, Condition Zero would also ship with a multiplayer edition, including content from the original CS with new maps, weapons, game modes, and even bot support. All was going well until around summer of 2002. Valve expressed that they wanted the single player to go in a different direction from what Gearbox was intending. This version outlined by Valve would be showcased at E3 2002 to excited fans. However, in July of 2002, following Valve's changes, Gearbox Software withdrew in good standing from the development of Condition Zero to focus on development of Halo Combat Evolved. A reason for the withdrawal was never officially relayed to Valve, but it's more than likely due to the single-player changes. It seems as though Valve didn't like Gearbox's open-ended mission approach and instead wanted something more linear like the original Half-Life. And so, Condition Zero was back in development limbo. Now in mid-2002, and determined to finish their title, Valve yet again set out to try and find a developer to continue with Condition Zero. In August of 2002, as per Gearbox's recommendation, development would be handed over to Ritual Entertainment, known for, well... oh, look, Quake. Development was done hand-in-hand between Ritual and Valve, reusing much of what Gearbox had made but recreating and restructuring the single-player experience. Valve strictly outlined their wishes to Ritual's developers, citing that they wanted a very traditional linear shooter sporting scripted sequences. Ritual would focus heavily on updating the game engine as well, while still keeping it close enough to the original to where they were compatible from a technical standpoint. Various changes to AI, animations, a new level design program based off Quake 3's Radiant design, as well as the addition of a new scripting system, allowing the developers to make changes on the fly to scripted sequences without having to recompile the entire map. One of Ritual's developers even stated that a patch was to be released that would couple both the original CS and Condition Zero multiplayers into one, exciting fans even more. All was on track and going well again with Ritual's development until the review copies hit the hands of various European game publications. Reception for the single player was rough, citing problems with AI, a plethora of other bugs, as well as most of the reviewers stating that the level design, while beautiful, was far too linear and scripted. Ritual would fire back at the claims, stating that the review copy they received was old code and that the bugs had been ironed out. Whether this is true or not is still unknown. Following the poor single-player reception, Valve would pull Ritual from Condition Zero's development. A good portion of Ritual's work would later be used in Counter-Strike's Xbox port in 2003, but for all intents and purposes, Condition Zero was now out of their hands. With Condition Zero's development now going on 2.5 years, Valve had to make a now or never decision for the game. With so much time and resources already being dedicated to the project, Valve were determined to have the game finished the way they originally envisioned it. They would hand development over to Turtle Rock Studios in mid-2003, who would yet again start fresh, using the comments from the review copies and past concepts from earlier development teams to aid them, revamped AI and game structure being the primary focus. The developers used the AI structure of past games in the sports genre to rework the NPCs in this new version of Condition Zero, allowing them to use bots much more effectively and implement them as a larger part of CZ's gameplay, which can easily be seen from the final product. Turtle Rock would also work alongside Valve on the project for the next year, while fans grew skeptical about if the game was actually still being worked on or not. And finally, on October 8, 2003, Turtle Rock's iteration of Condition Zero would finally be unveiled to the public and announced for a November 2003 release. Only a day after the announcement, however, Condition Zero's current build would be involved in the infamous Half-Life 2 leak. With November coming and going, Condition Zero was nowhere to be seen. Fans grew more confused with what was taking so long until, finally, nearly 3 years after its official announcement, Counter-Strike Condition Zero was officially and finally released to the public on March 23, 2004 via Steam and physical copy. In the end, Condition Zero would gain some traction from fans, but ultimately reviews were understandably mixed. A 3-year wait time for a game that was nearly identical to the original at the time with both welcome and unwelcome additions seemed a bit cheap for a company with such a reputation. Despite this, Condition Zero would go on to become somewhat of a happy accident to the community, still showing a 90+ positive rating on Steam as of today. Alongside this, Ritual's work wouldn't all be for nothing. Valve would end up packaging most of their work and releasing it alongside Condition Zero as a scripted single-player campaign dubbed The Deleted Scenes, which in my opinion is probably the best part of the game. Despite its tumultuous development history, Condition Zero would solidify its place as an obscure but somewhat welcome addition to the franchise. So what do you think of Condition Zero? Personally, I think the deleted scenes are actually pretty fun, and it goes without saying there's a group of pretty dedicated fans out there for this game. Somewhere.